asked them for credit, and they gave it to me. Well, we'd had to pay up bills anyway. When we moved, we had all this, so we didn't have a lot of money saved, even though we always tried to save a little bit. So when I didn't hear a penny for a postcard, well, Mama didn't hear from me for about a month. See, I'd write her a letter, 1 or 2 letters every month. She had moved. In the meantime, she had married and moved out to Maryland and then got married. And so I would write her a letter. Well, for a long time, I didn't. So finally, when Ben got his first paycheck, they owed him, always owe you one. And I went down and got some stamps and wrote her a letter. And I said, and I explained to her what happened. He had went to work for this company, and I just didn't have a penny for a postcard. Well, for I bet 2 years, every time I'd get a letter from her, she'd send me 2 or 3 stamps. so I'd be sure and write her. But and in the meantime, while we were over in Victoria, we had an apartment there, this Beverly Roberts, and the reason she got this, she came, and I don't know how she found out my address. I guess.
How did you get to Victoria?
It's just about 25 miles from Edna.
Okay.
We moved over there.
Victoria, Oklahoma.
No.
Victoria, Texas.
Yeah.
Okay.
We moved down there because that's where he went to work for the railroad. That's where the train station was. So the reason he got that job, this fellow came down to see us, and he said, well, he'd work for the railroad, and he said, I bet I can get you a job with the railroad. So he took him down there, and so that's when Ben tried out for the railroad. And this is the last time I've seen. I would love to have heard of Beverly, but she was older than I am, so she may be dead by now. But I lost track of her during the war, and I never have. I'm sure she married and had more family, but anyway, after.
Why was she special to you?
Well, she's the one that stayed with me up in Washington. We hitchhiked back together.
Okay.
You know, so we just had that.
What was her last name?
Beverly Roberts was her last name. And that was her married name because she had a little boy, and she kept her married name. And she come from Hobart, Oklahoma. But I've often thought they have these, you know, things you can trace. But anyway, this was, of course, in '41, and this was in '42 when we were in Victoria. And now, don't ask me why, but finally Herbert got laid off. And so Gladys and Herbert were moving back up to Oklahoma and stay with his mother. And why Ben, he had a good job because he was making as much or more there as he was working when he worked for the oil field. But whether it was because they were, and he said, well, he got tired of, you know, his men bossing him around. And anyway, he quit the railroad job. When Gladys and Herbert moved, he said, well, I'm going to go back up to Oklahoma and get a job. And I said, well, you've got a job here, why don't you stay with it and build up some seniority? Well, anyway, so he quit his job. We packed up. We only had a high chair and a baby bed and a mattress, I think. We went to Oklahoma. Now, his mom and dad had a 3-room house. There was Catherine and Sam and Jean and Maureen and Mr. and Miss Barnes there. Gladys had 3 kids. She and her husband went up there and moved in with them. And then there was Ben and I and Tommy, all in this one little house.
How many is that? 16?
We had pallets everywhere. Anyway, Ben started looking for a job, and Herbert did. They couldn't find anything. Finally, they found a job working on a section gang for the railroad. So this was like in August. They went out, and Ben and Herbert both almost had a heat stroke. It was really hot that summer, and they were out working, you know, in the heat. And I don't know whether either one of them had a hat or not. But anyway, I kept saying, Ben, you go up to the Katy Railroad at Muskogee and put in your application. Oh, they wouldn't hire me. I said, but you don't know. But finally, I talked him into going up there. So he went up there, and they said, go home and send me your resume, send me your work experience, and then we'll talk to you. Well, he came back and said, well, that didn't do any good. And I said, what'd they say? Well, they said to write my experience, and well, I said, well, do what they say to do. And he said, wouldn't do any good. So anyway, I did it and signed his name to it and sent it up there. Well, they wrote him. Of course, they didn't have a phone. They wrote him and told him to come to work the next day. So I said, now see, they did. So we went up there. It's like on a Wednesday or Thursday during the week. And Of course, we didn't have any furniture. We had a little, and I found a little furnished apartment. So he had gone out to on a run that day. I don't know whether they were paying him then or he had to go on a run or two before they paid him. But anyway, when he came in, I had to meet him down there because he didn't know where, we lived. And this was like Thursday that I rented this place. Well, he came in Saturday night and said, guess what? And I said, what? He said, we have to go to Denison. And I said, what do you mean we have to go to Denison? Well, this is where their headquarters is, and I've got to go down there. And because he was just working on a short run from Muskogee to down to Eufaula and Wilburton. And so here, I had to pay for a week for this, but of course we got our deposit back, but we didn't get our rent back. Anyway, we packed up, and we just had time. We had a high chair, baby bed, and a mattress. That's what we had. So we put this on top of the car, put the rest of our belongings in the back seat with Tommy, and drove to Denison. Well, we got down to Denison Sunday afternoon. Well, they owed us 2 paychecks, but we didn't have them, so we had $6 to our name. So we went. There was a motel out on the north edge of town, but we stopped in there, and it was going to cost us $6 for that night. I said, well, we won't have anything to eat with if we do. So anyway, the town hadn't. There was a lot of open space out across the street from the motel and up a little bit. So we just waited till dark and put our mattress down on the ground and slept out there on the ground the first night. Well, Ben had to go in to work then the next day, so I took him into work, and I found you talk about a crummy hole in the wall, but it had a bed and and a bathroom and a commode and a washstand. So I think in the meantime, I tried to get him to go to the bank and borrow money because he worked for the Katy. He had money coming. He didn't want to have nothing to do with no banks. He had never done any banking. So we went to the Peerless Finance Company. I never will forget it, but to borrow $50.
What was it?
It's called Peerless Finance Company. They're in Denison. And so they let us borrow $50. We had to pay for a phone call, $2 and something, for them to call Victoria to see if our credit was good. I told them we'd had credit at this one grocery store. So they let us have $50. We paid that back in 30 days. We had to pay $68, $18 now to borrow that $50 for 1 month. Anyway, we stayed in this little hole in the wall about 4 days before I could find, an apartment. And we found an apartment then. A lady, of course, this was during the war. This was, in '42, and rents were frozen right after we moved in, and this lady was real unhappy because this was before Karen was born, and she and I had a few run-ins because one time Tommy had just picked up, he was playing with something, he just picked it up and pounded it like that and just made one sound, like a 2-year-old would, and her 18-month-old here, and she come rushing over to my apartment. My husband's asleep and you're letting that child, I said, well, I had it out of his hand before, Anyway, the long and short of it was she couldn't raise the rent, and she said, you come out in the backyard, and she said, I'll just whip you all over this place. Well, I was about 6-7 months pregnant with Karen, and here she was even bigger than I was. I said, now wouldn't we look pretty out there, 2 pregnant women out there fighting? I said, what's the matter with you? And I said, I'll find a place to move just as soon as I can find a place. You don't have to worry. So anyway, I found I went over and I found this little house. It was just a living room and a bedroom and a kitchen over on East Main Street in Denison. And I went to bed that night, and I woke up about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I thought, oh my goodness, Ben doesn't even know I moved. I better be.
Wow.
So I went over and found it and moved while he was, up in Muskogee. He had a run from Denison to Muskogee. And so I called, and I had to go up there. I didn't even have a telephone. I had to go up I got Tommy out of bed, and I went up to the Katy depot, and to find out, and he was due in at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, so I had to wait there until he got to tell him where we had moved to. And then, of course, he was making anywhere from $87 every 2 weeks to $120, $150, something like that. Well, we'd put $100 in the bank and live on the rest of it, and sometime but we wanted to buy a house, instead of spending all of our money. Well, it wasn't that much for rent, but instead of renting. Well, that's when we bought that house on Roy Lake Road. I don't know how much you remember.
Yeah, how much did you pay for it? Do you remember?
We paid $1,900 for it.
And did you pay cash?
We paid $500 down and $45 a month.
And you pay, was it owner finance, or did you get a loan from the bank?
We got a loan from a mortgage company.
Okay.
The man that sold it to us, he had a mortgage company there. I forgot. Anyway, Denison Federal Savings and Loan, something like that. Anyway, we borrowed that. And of course, it had electricity, but no outhouse, and small kitchen. It had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 rooms. And when we moved out there, well, of course, Karen was born, and we moved out there in April. Karen was born in June, And then, of course, 18 months after she was born, Mike was born, there. And we burned wood at first. Well, wood finally got hard to get, and so Ben said, well, we'll get coal. Well, I don't know whether you've ever burned coal or not, but it's a disaster because it smokes your whole house, and you can't get that smell out and everything. There's no way to keep smoke from, even though you have a chimney and you have it good. So I said, well, why we didn't get electric stove, I don't know, because we had electricity. But anyway, they said, well, if we lived about 450 feet from a gas line. And I called the gas company, and they said, if your husband will put in a gas line, we'll come hook it up. I said, well, it's way back in a pasture. Well, that's all right. We'll hook it up wherever it is. So when Ben would be home, of course, sometimes he'd be home for a day and a half. Sometimes he'd just be home 8 or 10 hours. But when he was home any length of time, he'd go out there and start digging that, ditch to put in a gas line. Well, this was, before Michael was born, I had a lot of trouble. My uterus pressed against the nerve in my back, and I couldn't walk. So I was in a wheelchair about a month before he was born. And this was in December, and it was cold. And after he got the pipe laid and everything, and he, went down and talked to him to see what he had to do about laying the pipe and how he had to seal it and everything. And after he got the pipe laid, well, we called. They said, you have to get a plumber to come out and test it for leaks. Well, we called and we couldn't get a plumber. Oh, it'd take us all day and blah, blah, blah. So two of the ladies came out from church. They had heard I was sick, and they came out for church, and one of them says, why haven't you got any heat in here? Because I was, in bed and under a blanket. And I explained to her, and she said, I'll have a plumber out here in a couple of hours. Sure enough, she did. He came out, and you had to pump gas. Have you seen an old bicycle pump that pumped air in a bicycle tire?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he had to use that, but it didn't take him 25, 30 minutes to do it, and there was no leak or anything, so the gas company, and she called the gas company, and she said, I know it's Saturday, but I want you to get out there and hook that gas up. Well, they did. She had a lot of money in town, and so anyway, she had connections of somewhere, so they came out and, hooked that up, so we finally, got gas.
Who was she again?
Her name was Strigley, Sister Strigley at church. Her
Okay.
name was. And so this was still when we had a path.
What church?
Church of Christ.
Okay, in Denison.
Yeah. And there was only one at the time. Later they built one on Armstrong, and that was closer to us, so we went to Armstrong.
And you've always been Church of Christ?
When I was growing up, my mother was a Methodist, but she would go. What would happen, there would either be, sometime there'd be a Methodist church, sometime there'd be a Baptist, sometime we went to the Nazarene when we lived east of Norman, because my grandmother went to the Nazarene church. But whatever church was in the community, that's what we went to.
Okay.
Because we didn't have any, way to get anywhere else. But when we lived at Powell, I was 15 years old. Just before we left there, a Church of Christ preacher came, and we had what they call a meeting, and it was truly an arbor, because the men got out and they built, and they had trees on top or brush on top for the, and then they built benches, and it was a brush arbor meeting, and that's what they called it. And that's when I was baptized in the Church of Christ. Of course, back then, anytime they had a meeting or anything, there was nothing to do in the community. If you had a school play or anything connected with the church, everybody went because it was entertainment. And so that's when I was 15 years old, I was baptized in with the Church of Christ. But I didn't get to go because there was no church there for a long time until I went, back up to Oklahoma City. And then, of course, when I was working for people, I didn't get off on Sunday. I had to work. So it was not until after we married and lived there, Norman, that I got to go to. And mainly, when we went, well, I started going regular at Edna when we moved down there, and then Victoria, and then when we moved up to Denison, I started going there. But
so you got the gas line dug.
yeah, I got the gas line. He got the gas line dug, and we got in. Well, after, of course, at that time I had an old ice box that you put 100 pounds in the top, and you had a pan underneath. Well, finally I convinced Ben to dig a hole, not dig a hole, but bore a hole there, and I put a pipe with a funnel on it, so I didn't have to, so the water would go underneath the house. It wasn't that much, and it would dry out. So I wouldn't have to empty that pan all the time, because you'd forget and it'd run over and you'd have a mess to clean up. But I went down, I made friends with the man that worked at one of the departments, the department stores. Anyway, they had refrigerators. See, during the war they quit making refrigerators. You couldn't buy one. And so the first one that came to Denison was an ice maker, and I got the first one that they had. And I've had an ice maker ever since. I'll never will forget. A few years ago, Karen...
Was it a freezer refrigerator with an ice maker?
Wow. It
Wow.
was a freezer refrigerator with an ice maker. Well, no, it didn't have a freezer. It was just an ice maker.
Okay.
And Karen said a few years ago, when they got their ice refrigerator went out, she was looking at an ice maker, and Dave said, "You can get this one for an ice maker for $100 less." She said, "David, my mother's had an ice maker all my life, and I'm not going to pay for an ice maker." But anyway, I've always had an ice maker, and I don't know why my sister never did particularly care for one. And I said, every time I try to fill up those trays with water, I'd always spill them on the floor and have to walk them. I said, if I ever got a chance to get an ice maker, I was never going to fill trays again.
Do you remember what you paid for that refrigerator?
Oh, no, but it was, I think, just a little over $100.
Okay.
And I got to pay $10 down, probably $2 a month. But, of course, this was in, 1945. He called me the first one he got in, and I got it. Well, of course, this was in, Mike was born in December of '44. That was an event because Ben stayed home for a whole week. He was due Christmas Day, and he didn't come till the 30th of December. Well, he was born on Saturday night, and Ben left and went to work that morning. Well, we lived out, 2 or 3 miles from town, and I called a cab when I knew I was going to have to go to the hospital. I couldn't get a cab. It was raining. It was bad. The weather was terrible. And then I called a friend, and they were gone. I called another friend. They weren't home. Of course, a lot of people on Saturday night went out to eat or went to a movie. After calling about 4 or 5 people, I thought, I've got to get to the hospital one way or the other. And the regular hospital was shut down, and everybody was going to, the Katy had their own hospital there for their employees.
Katy Railroad.
Yeah. And so everybody was going out there because the other one was closed for remodeling. Well, finally, I thought, well, I'm going to call the preacher. And I called the preacher's wife. And she said, well, how far apart are your pains? And I said, well, about 5 minutes. She said, I'll be right out. She brought her clothes out with her. After she picked me up, I never saw anybody dress in the car and drive a car. She put her clothes on while and of course back then ladies didn't wear pants, they wore dresses. And she took me to the Katy Hospital. This must have been about 9:30 at night. And I got there, and she told him, she said, you're going to have to watch your clothes. She said, her pains are coming every 2 or 3 minutes apart. And one lady said, I said, now this is my 3rd child. And the nurse examined me. She said, oh, you got a long way to go. I said, no, I'll deliver before midnight. And she said, oh, and I heard her tell another nurse, said, don't have to worry about that. She won't deliver. And in fact, the doctor, I'd called him, and they said, well, he's at the hospital. He was in there. He was in there being tested for allergies. He had some kind of allergies, and they were trying to find out. So he went into the hospital just to have them, check, and they did some kind of patch testing back then. And so she stayed with me. I tried to get her to go on home, but I didn't have anybody, there with me. But she stayed with me. Ben's niece, I think, was down there at the time, or his mother wanted to. I guess his mother was down there, and she kept Karen and Tommy. And so when I had a terrible pain, and the nurse said, and Imogene called, and the nurse, and she called her, and she said, you need to come in and check her. She said, oh, she's not going to deliver. She said, I need for you to come in now. She came in, she said, oh my goodness, said she is going to deliver. She said, we got to get her to the delivery room. And she called the doctor, and she said, tell that doctor to put his pants on and get up here. And about that time, I had another pain. She said, tell that doctor to get up here and leave his pants alone. Anyway, sure enough, Mike was born about 11:30 at night, and I didn't get to the hospital till 9:30.
Saturday night, and it was raining.
Saturday night, and it was raining, and of course Ben was gone. And but anyway, when I got home, my neighbor had said, I only gained 12 pounds with Michael. I was sick a lot, during that time, and I only gained 12 pounds. And she said, you're going to have a rabbit. You're not big enough to have a baby. So I got home, and Michael weighed 9 pounds and 14 ounces.
Wow.
And when I brought him home, she said, that's not your baby. They gave you the wrong baby. You couldn't have that big a baby. I said, no, Miss Bourne. I said, he was the only one born there for 2 whole days, and I come home within 2 days. So I said, I know they didn't give me the wrong baby because he was only there. But and of course, I guess one thing I forgot to mention, all during the war, we had rationing on. And that was one of the few times that I charged groceries. And I went to this one store that I did a lot of groceries because it was a home-owned grocery store, and I like to trade with people. And so I found out that if you had a charge account there and paid it up, every month, well, peaches and fruit and chocolate and different things and sugar and everything was rationed. Well, of course, with having 2 children, I always had enough sugar coupons, and Ben's folks lived on the farm, and they had more than they ever used too. So she would give me her sugar coupons. Well, I would give Miss Bourne,
Well, it's a sugar coupon.
Well, you couldn't buy sugar unless you had a coupon. And
Why was that?
Well, it was rationed during the war.
Okay.
I don't know what. And I didn't think about it, but one of the ladies told me later, she said she went down and bought 100 pounds of sugar, or 200 pounds before, when she found, they told you, they said, they'd say today it's going to be rationed the 1st of December, or first in the middle of October, 1st November. And she made it up into syrup and canned it. She made sugar syrup, because her family liked sweetened tea.
Right.
And you could use it for other things, and she would make a syrup, and then she'd can it in quart jars, just like you would anything else,
right.
Water bath. And I didn't think about that, because I had enough sugar, but I always gave Miss Bourne extra sugar coupons, because even if you had the money, you couldn't buy it unless you had a coupon. Well, same way with canned fruit, and and that's the reason I charged my groceries, because I'd go and charge, and then first of the month, or when I got paid, I'd pay my bill, because he'd save the peaches and pears and apricots and chocolate and things for his regular customers.
How would they account for the coupons? Would you get them in the mail from the government?
Yeah,
Okay.
you got them from the government, and then he turned them into the government. It was just a lot of bookwork, just like taxes now, and how you have to do. I know when we had the store, people would come in, they'd say, I'm not paying taxes. I said, I'm not paying your taxes. I said, we have to collect it, and then we have to send it to the state. I said, we don't get to keep any of that tax. And one man says, I'll buy this, but I'm not paying tax. I said, then forget it. I'm not paying your tax. People, are funny. But anyway, so after, Mike was born, in 44? Well, about that time, Ben had worked for the railroad for quite a while. And while he was working for the railroad, he met these friends of people, Ernie O'Neill and Elmo Reddick. And Ernie had a jewelry store there in Denison. And he started just hanging around with them. They said, Ben, why don't you learn the watch work? Ernie was older, and I guess he wanted to retire. He said, and Elmo was working for him, he said, you need to learn to fix watches. And why they talked him into it, I don't know. But anyway, he went down, I guess, for 3 or 4 years while he was working for the railroad. When he'd be off and home for 2 days, he'd go down there and stay and work. So he did this for, I guess, at least 3 years, learning on his own. And when Ernie thought he knew enough to go to work for him, well, he'd pay him $35 a week. Well, he quit a job making like $150 every 2 weeks, making $200 or $300 a month. And I said, Ben, why don't you stay at the railroad? They have a good retirement, they have good insurance, they have good, thing. Well, these men call me boy, and I don't like the way they boss me around. And I said, well, anytime you work for anybody, you're going to have to learn to live with people that, you know, are over you. But he didn't like it, so anyway, I couldn't talk him, so we used up nearly all of our savings, you know, we'd save living the first couple of years because he went to work for $35 a week. Well, we had 3 kids then, and he went, I'm trying to remember how long he worked, probably a year, 2 years, year and a half he worked for Ernie, and, or 2 years I guess before he was able to go to Sherman. There was a jewelry store in Sherman that wanted somebody to come in and just fix watches and do repair work. Well, he had learned how to do watches and clocks, and he was learning jewelry repair, you know, just simple. He'd learning welding. And so he went over, and he would pay the store like 20%, and then he'd keep 80% of everything he made. So he thought that would be a good deal. So he went over to Ordenduff's Jewelry in Sherman, and he was over there when, I'm trying to remember, he went over there possibly in 48, 49. Anyway, he was over there when Yvonne was born. She was born in 1950. He'd been over there, I guess, a couple of years, so he had to go there around 48. And he worked over there for possibly 4 or 5 years, I guess, maybe 6. Anyway, when he got a chance to buy, when Ernie decided he wanted to retire, and he got a chance to buy Ernie O'Neill out the store there in Denison. It was on Main Street right next to the Rialto Theater. So he decided to, and I forgot how much he paid for it. He may know, I don't know whether he'll remember or not. But anyway, it made a decent living, but you know.
Paul bought the store?
Yeah, he bought that store in Denison. So he stayed there. I was trying to remember. And of course, Yvonne was born in 1950.
In Denison. In
Denison. And Jane was born in 52 in Denison, and still out there on Loy Lake Road. And also, Debbie was born in 1955. Well, Debbie was born in May of 1955, and I'm trying to think. I thought it was Easter. No. What time was it? Anyway, our house burned in 1955, and Debbie was a baby. Yvonne was about 3 years. Well, no, she would have been 4 years old, 5 years old, 4 years old. It was before. No, it burned in 55. So I can't remember whether Debbie was born or not. I should remember that. But anyway, she was playing with matches, and
who was?
In the closet, Yvonne was. And Ben had bought me an old fake fur coat for Christmas, and I don't like anything fake. I'd rather have a good cloth coat than a fake fur, but some salesman had sold him that for me, and it was hanging up in the closet. And I had gone down to take him to, he did some jewelry work for, my eyes are worn today, for a store there in Denison, and this was after while he was in, he'd gone to Durant to work at that time, I guess. No, he just worked in Sherman, but he was picking up and delivering watches there for a store in Denison. And he said, well, Saturday nights is it's a hard night to find a parking place, because back then everybody would go to town on Saturday night. Anyway, he said, if you'll drive me, I can just get out and run in and take these watches into them and then pick up their jewelry work, and I won't have to try to find a parking place.
Mm-hmm.
So, shouldn't have taken over 20-25 minutes at the most. Well, this is what we did, and I let him out. He went in the store, and I drove back around. I drove around the square, and when I turned the corner, I saw Mrs. Johnson out there just waving. And of course, I was going to stop there, and she says, "Get home," she said, "your house is on fire and your house is burning." And she said, "We'll bring Ben." So I just, no, I did. I stopped and I got Ben because he was there, and we'd gone, and she had played. Well, Tommy, I told him, I said, if the house anything happens, I said, get the kids out, because I said, that's all that matters. So this is what he did. He got the kids out while, when the house was on fire, and they were up to the Brutons, and there it was. And of course, they called the fire department. And, you know, the account next day in the paper, or whenever it was, said, well, slight damage, you know, the house didn't burn down. Well, it should have burned down. We'd been better off financially because Ben didn't have any insurance. He didn't believe in insurance then.
Really?
So we had no insurance, and but they would, Allstate, that's the reason I wouldn't take Allstate. They'd come in and say, this door jamb, you know, hit the door. It'd be black as tar. And he said, oh, you can clean that and paint that and replace it. Well, it started there in the closet. Well, it burned the bathroom, and 2 bedrooms were just charred. The ceiling was gone. And of course, it was out away from the city water. So what the fire doesn't hurt, the water damage does. But they had the water tank, you know, and they put the water. And Ben, I just bought him a new 3-piece suit for Christmas, you know, with 2 pair of pants. And back then you couldn't get smoke out. All of our clothes smelled smoke. You couldn't, you know, we had to just start all over as far as clothes because they smelled smoke so bad you couldn't. Because smoke and water smoke didn't damage, the water did. Mm-hmm. And the kitchen, and in fact, you know, like it would have started in one of the bedrooms, and it got part of the kitchen and part of the, you know, part of the other. And when one of the ladies came out there to see it, she said, I don't know why they said, you know, just slight damage. She said, your house is gutted inside, which is what it amounted to. But of course, we had put siding on it, so it didn't, you know, the outside didn't burn. But also it came in, you know, and we did have, I think, $2,500. I think he had $2,500 policy. Because they came out, and we got about half of what we would have gotten. Because they said, and, well, you can replace this, and half of this board's good, you can, you know, splice it. And they just nitpicked it to pieces. And so, of course, this was in 1955. Well, we just had to clean it up and move into it because we didn't have enough insurance to, you know, move anywhere else.
Right.
So we were in the process of course, you know, Debbie was, like I said, Debbie was a baby then. We were in the process of building it back. We had finished everything. He had a friend that come out, and we had to move all the sheetrock and take everything out of the house. And I had just put pasteboard boxes, you know. I had one here with Tommy's clothes, one for Karen's, and one of my neighbors got so mad. She said, Nora, she said, people just bring stuff out here that they were going to give to the Salvation Army or take to the dumpster and just give it to you. And she'd say, they know you wouldn't wear stuff like that. She said, why would they bring it out? She'd come over and help me to, you know, wash and iron it. And she said, I wouldn't put this on a dog. But, and Karen never will forget, one of the ladies at church took her down and bought her 2 new dresses and 2 outfits, you know, so she'd have something to wear. And Karen to this day has never forgot her because, you know, everybody else brought hand-me-downs or things that they didn't want, and that people meant well. I told Dolly, I said, Dolly, people mean well. She said, no, they don't. They're just trying to get rid of their junk. I said, anyway, it took us. Of course, Ben and he had a friend that would come out and help him, and he knew the man that was head of the electric company there. And he told Ben how to get it wired, and this man did a lot of extra wiring. In fact, the one that was there, he said, I'll send a man out to help you. Anyway, he helped him to get the electricity, you know, put back in. And then this other fellow did the sheetrock, and I did a lot of the they did tape and bedding, and I do the tape and bedding, they do the sanding. Anyway, we put it back together ourselves. We liked the living room carpet, and I think we had the walls up. We liked the ceiling. And this was in 1958, and I went to Mother's for Easter. I went to Oklahoma City. And Ben says, well, I'm going to stay here and try to finish up in the living room. And because he had to finish doing something in the living room. Well, there was a light fixture there, and he had to tape them off, you know, until there wasn't a light fixture there. He had to put one up. But we'd fixed everything else so we could use the kitchen. Well, when was it? Of course, Easter was on Easter Sunday. We'd gone up on Friday. After the kids got out of school, we went up on Friday. And Saturday night, Did he call me that night? No, Sunday morning early. He didn't call me until Sunday morning. Or maybe he called me that night. Anyway, he had decided, well, his friend, Jim Whiting, called him and said, Ben, you don't need to work anymore. And he said, there's a good Western on about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. He said, come over and watch it with us. So he went over there to Jim's to watch the movie with him. And when he went home about midnight, the house was on fire. I don't know whether mice had gotten up and taken off the ends of the taping that he had done in the living room. Well, it was so far gone then that it completely burned down. By the time the fire truck got out there, the house was, it was completely burned down. Well, what happened the next morning after, when the house burned down the first time, or we had a dug well at the back, and we used that to water the gardens, and we used it to water the flowers and the yard. But we had, by then we had city water. And the first time the house, I forgot to tell you, the first time the house burned or was done, when I got out there I came home from Oklahoma City on Sunday afternoon, and Ben called me, and I left Jan and Debbie up there, and Jan to this day, she said, Mama, you lied to me then. I said, I know it, I couldn't. Because she said, are you going home? You going to leave us up here? They didn't want to stay, and I had no place to keep them, and and Yvonne was in school, but Jan wasn't, and I said, well, I'll be back for you. I didn't tell her right then. She thought I was coming right back, but anyway, I was so, and what I never did tell the kids that then, I'd had a miscarriage on Saturday night. Well, I got up and I drove home on Saturday. And the next Monday morning, when I got out there to check the house, of course I went out to see it, but we found there was a little motel that had kitchenettes, out between Denison and the dam. And I finally found this place out there that had a 2-burner hot plate that we could cook a few meals on. I got out there early the next morning, and there was a man pulling pipe out of we had a dug well that was in the garage, and we used it to water the garden and things. We had city water at that time. And I said, what are you doing? He said, well, these people's house burned. They won't need this dug well. I said, this is mine. He said, I was going to sell this pipe and make me a few dollars. And I was just so mad. I said, I'm going to call the police. Well, he heard it out of there. He was out there now pulling this pipe out of the well. Can you believe that? And he said, well, these people won't miss this, and I was so angry. I said, I can't believe you would do this to some people that
down on their luck.
Yeah, down on their luck. But anyway, the house burned to the ground that time, so we had, I think then we only had $5,000 or $6,000 coverage. Ben still didn't. You couldn't convince him that insurance. Every time I take out insurance, he'd cancel it. We raised 6 kids without a dime's worth of hospitalization or any kind of insurance. And the only reason he has insurance now to bury him is because Rule, I told him, I said, Rule, what do you think about somebody that doesn't even have a policy to bury him when he died? And he said, Ben, you're kidding. And he explained to him he had this policy that it gets interest and builds up interest. And so he finally took out 15 on him and 10 on me. So
15,000?
Yeah, have enough to bury us on. But of course, this happened in '58. Well, of course, Tommy graduated the next year. He was a junior in high school, and we stayed in this motel, I guess, 6 weeks before we could find a house, and that's when we moved out on Washington Street. With only $6,000 to pay down on one. Anyway, we found this one that we could buy for $6,000 with a down payment and assume a loan. So this is what we did. It was out off Juanita Drive, so we moved out there, and I'm trying to remember if Morton Street Church was there, if they built it after we
What
moved
year?
there. This was 1958.
Okay.
See, Debbie was 3 years old. So, I'm trying to see in '58 where was Ben. Did he have the store there in Denison? I guess he did. He had the store there. It wasn't long afterwards. In fact, before then, I forgot to tell you that I had a diaper route. And it got dumped on me because he and another fellow were going to go in partners and buy this diaper route that the man had in Sherman. And he told them, oh, they could make this much money, they could make that. Well, this was like in '54, because this was before Debbie was born.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ben says, okay, Bernard, I'll go in with you. Well, after Ben signed the papers, then Bernard decided he wasn't going to do it. So Ben ended up buying this diaper service by himself. Well, guess who? Ben was working at Sherman at the time, so guess who had to run the diaper service? Me. Here, I had three, well, Debbie wasn't even born yet. I had Yvonne and Jan. And, you know, the other kids in school here, I had 5 kids to take care of, but I had to go to Sherman and run this diaper service. Well, I had to go to Whitewright, to South Maid, to Bell's, and to Leonard, and back through Sherman, you know. And
how long did it take you?
Well, it would take me most of a day, you know. I'd, of course, do the, we had pails that we left with them that we furnished with deodorant in them, and I would pick them up. They'd have them outside. They knew when I was coming.
Dirty diapers.
Yeah, dirty diapers. See, this was before Pampers and
right.
And diapers, you know, came in. So, but it'd take me most of the day, or at least 3/4 of the day, to, you know, to get to the, you know, diaper route. Well, that's.
Would you do that diaper route every day?
No, I did it twice a week.
Okay.
And that's when Tommy was 14. He was 14, so this was in, we got, I guess, in 54, because yeah, he was 54 the year that he was 14, because he got a hardship license and let a child get a hard, you know, and so he could go with me and drive, and then I could, or at first I drove for a long time, and he'd go with me, and he'd run in and go up, and they'd be on the porch. They knew where to put them, and, you know, we'd get them, and that'd save time. Instead of one having to get them, he would go get them. And then he got his driver's license in 55, and then he would drive, you know, and help me with it. And then finally it got so in the summertime, you know, just before Debbie was born, he had to do it both, because I wasn't able to go. She was born, see, the last of May. And so when she was 5 days old, something happened. What happened to Tommy? He couldn't go. And Ben says, well, you're going to have to get up and go do that diaper route. Because Tommy had gone over and washed him, and, you know, we had a commercial washer. And that's when you heard me talk about Lemoyne, my friend Lemoyne. Anyway, there were 4 of us girls, Lemoyne, Nora, and Eunice, and I. And our boys started school together, and so we were friends. And all 3 of them are dead now, but I'm the only one living in the 4. But Lemoyne's daughter, Zoanne, and Tommy started school, 1st grade together. So we'd been friends that long. Well, when she'd call me and wanted to know how I was doing, and I said, well, I'm going on that diaper route. She started cussing. She said, that Ben Barnes, she said, don't you know your baby's only 5 days old, that you can't go in that truck? And you know, it was a delivery truck. It was a panel delivery truck. She said, I'll go and you can tell me how to go, and I'll get the diapers and I'll put them in there. So she said, so she went with me, you know, for like 2 weeks on that diaper route. And
who would clean them?
we did. We washed them, and they were washed through what, three soaps, 3 waters, or washed through 2 waters, and then we rinsed them through 3 waters, and then we had to fold them up and, you know, keep them. You had bags that you put, you know, everybody's, you know, this, like Miss Jones was in this bag, Miss
Right.
was in that, Miss Johnson's in this bag, and you washed and dried them in these bags, and then you folded them up and put them in there, you know, bag to take them home and take them to their house, and then you delivered the same diapers, you know, to different ones. So we had at least a building over in Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, finally, I'm trying to remember, this was 50, maybe 56, 57. Anyway, it got unprofitable, so I told Ben we had to sell it. So I found this fellow that wanted to buy it.
How long do you own it? 3 years?
Probably about 3 years. And I told Ben, I said, well, be sure that you get enough money down in case something happens. Well, he didn't listen to me. So this fellow paid him maybe, I'm trying to remember, maybe $1,700 or something like that. With this equipment that was worth thousands of dollars. and was going to pay out so much a month. Well, it went good for 2 or 3 months, and then it went over there one day, and everything was gone. He just sold it off and didn't ever do anything. So anyway, we lost on that deal. So about that time is when he decided to go to Durant and work. I don't know why he left Orndust. I'm trying to remember why he would. He got this better deal, I guess. Anyway, this man in Durant, he left Orndust to buy the store in Denison, and the store in Denison wasn't doing too well. So he said, well, you can run this, and I'll go up there and and make more money up there, because the man had a good repair business, And, so he just wanted him up there, and I think he only had to pay him 10%. He just wanted somebody there that knew how to fix watches and fix repairs, so he could make. So he worked when he was up there, and one time, I never will forget, I said, Ben, of course, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm no dummy either. And I knew what he was making, what the store was making, didn't add up to the right amount in the bank account. And I asked him one time, I said, Ben, do you have a bank account in Durant? Well, why would I have a bank account in Durant? I said, well, do you? No, I don't have a bank account in Durant. I said, well, the money's not all where it's supposed to be. So one day, he had that's back when you had a bank book, and they'd write a deposit in the bank book, and you kept a bank book of all your deposits. And he had taken it out of his shirt pocket and left it up on the dresser. Well, I was needing to get something off the dresser, and I looked and I thought, well, there's a bank book in Durant. What's the bank book doing there? And I opened it, and here he had, was it $900 or $1,200 over there at the bank? And he come home that night, and I said, I thought you didn't have a bank in Durant. What do you mean, I don't have a bank? I said, well, what's this bank book doing there? What are you snooping around for? I said, I wasn't snooping around. I said, I'm getting something off the dresser, and here it was. I said, Ben, I said, you're go back and forth to work at 20 miles every day. What if you were in a car wreck? I said, would you rather the state of Oklahoma get that money? Or I said, I knew there was some money somewhere. I just didn't know where it was. But why would you not tell me about it? Well, I had to have that he said, I had to have that to pay bills up there. I said, that's a crock, Ben. I said, they don't care whether the bank is in Ohio or Mississippi or Oklahoma or Texas. As long as they get a check and it's good, that's all anybody cares about. And it made him mad because he got caught.
Yeah.
That was another thing. I had a call from a lady one time. She says, I just think you ought to know that your husband's hugging and kissing on a gal down here at the drugstore. She said, you ought to know what's going on behind your back. And I said, well, why don't you take care of your own business and I'll take care of mine. That's all I said. But one time I got the mail, and I was just sorting it out. Well, he got the telephone bill, and and it just wasn't sealed. So I just opened it, and here were all these calls to Durant. And this was before, when he had the store, before he ever even thought about going to Durant. And so I jotted down the number, and then I just sealed the envelope, because I would never looked at it had it not been unsealed, but it was made that way. They just run them through this thing, and this one didn't have to get sealed. So I knew a girl at the telephone office, and I said, can you find out who this number is? And she said, yeah. And so she told me. And I just bided my time, and one time when he was giving me a lot of trouble, I said, by the way, who is so-and-so? Well, he looks funny. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, there's an awful lot of telephone calls, going to that number. Well, this girl, of course, he didn't know that I knew her at the telephone company. The next day, she says, I wish you'd have been here. He said, Ben, come over here, Starman. And he knew the fellow that run was in charge of the telephone company there. Of course, a small town, they're in business together. And he told him, he said, who in the world? He said, I didn't think you were supposed to give out our information, blah, 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 and this. He said, well, tell me who it is. And he said, I'll find out who it is. Well, he didn't ever, he never told me. She told me about him coming over. But anyway, he thinks, you know, I let people think that I don't know anything. It's to my advantage, and then I use it when it's when it's advantage to me. But anyway, he only worked at Durant for what, probably 2-3 years. Well, he worked there until he went to actually Hutchinson, Kansas, and the men that he moved to Richardson with. When Gibson opened the store in Sherman, I don't know whether you remember Gibson's, but they were a discount. They had the store in Sherman. Well, the Johnson boys had their jewelry department there in Sherman. Well, Gibson's also had a store in Hutchinson, Kansas, and they needed, one of the Johnson boys' son was up there, and they needed somebody else that knew how to fix watches because he was just learning. So they wanted to know if Ben would go up there, and he could stay with Felix. So that's when Ben left Durant and went to Hutchinson, Kansas. And this was, must have been 60, I'm trying to remember, was he up there when we moved down? Yeah, he was up there when we moved down to Richardson. So he was up there for, I guess, a year and a half. So he... you know, stayed with them. Well, when Gibson started, they opened 5 stores here in Richardson in 1966. And they wanted the Johnson boys to come down since they had one there and take over the jewelry department. Well, this was a fiasco to begin with because Gibson, you had to buy all your jewelry from them to begin with. I guess they got it from a wholesaler somewhere, so you were paying too much for it to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, then when you sold it, you bought everything from them. Then when you sold it, they got 10% off the top. Well, when we came down here, the store opened right up here on Arapahoe, and Ben, of course, by then he was a good watchmaker. Well, Riley told him, said, Ben, just get these watches to work, and said, we don't care if they're doing, if you know, they come back or not. Said, we're here to sell the merchandise, not to repair watches. Ben said, Riley, if I fix a watch and they have to come back onto me, he said, I'm the one that has to make it good. Said, I either fix it good or I don't fix it. So he said, okay, go ahead and about to Ben. Well, when they opened up, I worked for him for a while because I'd worked when he was in Sherman. In fact, I'll tell you about one incident in Sherman. This friend of mine, Eunice, that she's gone now, but there were 4 of us together. One year, she needed some money to buy clothes, herself clothes with, and I wanted to, I don't know whether you ever heard this Queen for a Day, but they were on radio and TV. And so they were going to be in Dallas, and I wanted enough money to come down here, and Ben wouldn't give me any money, so we wanted to go get a job somewhere, but just to get a short-term job. So this one man advertised in the paper for cotton pickers. So he furnished his tax, and he paid $1.50, I think, $1.50, $2.00. Anyway, so we drove over. So I had Tommy and Karen then. They were babies. I guess that was before Michael was born. Mm-hmm. And she had just one child. So we would drive over there early Monday morning to take her car because we only had one car, and Ben used it to go to work in Sherman. And we'd go over there and we'd take potted meat and we'd take sandwiches, you know, and peanut butter and stuff for the kids. And we'd drag the kids on the, no, Michael was baby because we dragged the kids on I dragged him, and Karen and Tommy could walk, and they would play and we'd pick cotton. Well, we did this for about 3 weeks. And I think she made about $80 or $100. Anyway, I could pick 250 pounds of cotton.
Wow.
And so we picked this man. Well, in December every year, I would work over at, this friend of mine kept the kids, and I would work over at Orange House in December, you know, helping them to sell. And this man came in one time, he said, you sure do look familiar. I think, have I ever met you? And I said, well, you ought to. I picked cotton for you for about 3 weeks. And he said, he said something about jewelry, and I said, well, that's my husband back there. And he just shook his head, well, what's the jeweler's wife doing out picking cotton? I said, because I needed the money. And, you know, he didn't say anymore. But I'll tell you this about, there was just one instant when I was working, a young man came in, when I was working for Orange, and he had about, and like I said, this was early 50s, late 40s, I guess. And he had about $75 or $80. So to me, that was a lot of money. I think there's somebody at the front door. And you want to,